All right, and welcome everyone to the Ginette Biro Podcast. I'm Ginette Biro, and I am very thrilled to be interviewing this beautiful lady here, Miss Elyse Cathrea. And she is a dear friend of mine as well, but that aside, she is a very, very gifted wellness coach, yoga and meditation instructor, and truly a very adept, intuitive, and medium, to be honest. So we'll give you that whole introduction that way in that entirely long title of truth, I would say.
I should abbreviate it. I should make like an acronym. I feel like
right?
That would be good.
That'd be a good idea, actually. Yeah. So thank you for being on the show again. You were my very, very first person that I interviewed on the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, and I think we got the sound better now because I know the first time we did it, the sound for you was really low. It was introductory, but we're here now. So yeah, thanks for being here. And
thanks for having me.
I would love to talk to you more about what you do, because you do also offer your services on avalonspirit.com, which I'm so thrilled to have. But beyond the promotional factor of that, that aside, I really want to talk about what it is you do, because it is of such value and it is so incredibly unique to you. So,
yeah. So, as you mentioned, wellness coach, as well as yoga instructor, meditation instructor. So, really the big piece of my practice is coaching as well as the yoga meditation. And I talk about them separately, but they tend to be very intertwined in the work that I do. So, and same with the intuitive piece, it just kind of funnels in, I would say. And so for me, wellness coaching is really we hear a lot about life coaches, nothing wrong with that title. We get the question a lot, what is a life coach though? And I get the question, what is a wellness coach? For me, I chose the title wellness coach, and that's the certification that I did specifically because, our life, everything that happens in our life contributes to our wellness in one way or another. So you could look broadly at any area of life and see ways in which, if things are out of alignment and we're not existing within that space within us that is aligned, and we're listening to that intuition or our, gut, whatever you want to call it, that can cause a lot of dis-ease. And using that word intentionally around not disease, but just a lack of ease and health in the body as well as the mind. And so everything is so intertwined. And I know you and I have talked about the idea of the mind, body, spirit connection, and how all of these things kind of funnel so deeply into each other. So when I talk about wellness coaching, it's really from that broader perspective, and it's tailored to what every client needs, because it's so different. I work a lot with people who are feeling really stuck. It's kind of that sense of there's got to be more to my life than this. Is this all that there is? And it's kind of that nagging question that just is constantly in your gut, just hey, there's more. What are you doing? And that can be often what leads people to working with me. So I would say that's a big piece of it. As well, feeling really stuck in your career, relationships, the relationship with your body and your health, because that can also be a really kind of tricky thing to navigate when we're being told a million things by the world and society about what that looks like. When really my belief is that has to be very individual, and it should be coming from our own intuition first and foremost. There's experts and, specialists and medical professionals and all those things that help to support that, but only we truly know what's going to feel right for us. So a lot of the work that I do can be about connecting back into what feels right within your body, within your life, within your mind. And I frame that as coming home to yourself, because for me, if we are disconnected from ourselves, if we're disconnected from our intuition, if we're disconnected from what our body and our mind and our spirit is truly saying to us, how do we know where we want to go? It makes sense that you would feel stuck, because you're not getting any guidance from your own intuitive self to say, hey, this is actually where you need to go. So it's a big process of reconnecting to self, getting into and having, powerful conversations with my clients around what in their, deepest self of self feels like it would be in alignment for them, and moving into that. So, it can get really intuitive, because both for the client as well as me, because it's really about connecting back into that. And that is kind of my, not answer for everything, but my belief about how we can survive through challenging things. Because life is always going to throw us curveballs, and things are always going to fall in our path. And it's that ability to reconnect back to the self that allows us to navigate everything going on in our human experience. But if we don't know how to do that, then, how do we move forward?
Yeah. And I really love that about your, what you offer, is because it is so, it truly is so multifaceted. And I know that even when I've worked with you in a professional sense too, right? We can either do this on a coaching based, thing, like we can communicate on a coaching based aspect, or you can say, let's just go straight into the body and let's move your body through things. And you'll kind of intuitively lead me to move my body through different yoga positions that are unlocking a whole bunch of stuff. But then the interesting thing too, is after that experience, then we can come together and communicate in a very intuitive way, right? So like you offer such a, like, for lack of a better word, a grocery store of tools, right? Not just like a single specialty shop. There's so much that you offer in what you do. And you really, I have seen how you do tailor that to what is needed. And it can change all the time, which is really neat. It's not stuck to a rigid structure either.
And really for me, working with somebody, I want it to change. Because if it doesn't change, then you're maybe not moving forward in a way that's actually that effective for you. And I think we need different things for different times in our lives, and everybody is so different in what works for them. So for me, a big part of when I'm working with somebody over a longer period of time is creating practices, creating routines, creating tools that are individual to actually support that person. So for instance, everyone talks about meditation, or everyone talks about journaling, or, kind of the self-care tools of the hour, right? That we're all kind of trying to access, especially in 2020, because we have to get creative if we can't go to the gym or do what we normally would do. Some people hate journaling. And so it is not in my best interest as a coach or my client's best interest to say, but no, you really should journal. Like that's the thing for you. If you hate it, you're not going to do it, or you're going to go into it with an intention and an energy that isn't going to actually get you the results that you want for whatever we're focusing on. So for me, it's really about tailoring what we're doing to make sure it works for the client. And I have some people that I've worked with that I'm like, okay, let's just try journaling. Like 3 minutes, that's it. And if they come back to me and say like, I tried it, I hate it, then we're not going to go down that road. And I'm not the coach to say like, no, you need to do this thing though, because, we all need to just be able to find ways to move forward that actually fit with us. And that's one of the benefits of working with a coach one-on-one, is being able to find that tailored plan versus, Google and the internet and getting 1,000 different options that you're just really not sure what to do with or how they're going to actually work for you.
Yeah. And that's so important, because it really is about coming back to flow, right? Like we need to find our flow, and everybody's like you're saying is totally different, and there isn't one way to do it. And that's what we really believe in at Avalon as well, right? Which is why we're so happy to have you as a part of the team, is that there are many paths to wellness, many paths to ascension, to awakening, to whatever you want to call it. There are many paths, and even our own path doesn't have to be a singular linear path either. It can deviate and become whatever it's meant to be. So yeah, that's why I really like what you do. I just think there's so much about what you offer. And I want to speak specifically to meditation right now, because again, like you're saying, with all these kind of limitations that people have right now because of COVID and where we're at, one of the things that people are absolutely not limited in accessing is meditation, right? Meditation, whether they follow a guided one on YouTube, or just music-based, flame-based, if they're looking at a fire or a candle. There's so many ways. But the thing that I find people struggle with most is how they get into a meditative state. So how do you tend to coach people into prepping or opening to a meditative state?
Yeah. So for me, I'm someone, even as a yoga instructor, coach, meditation teacher, whatever, human, I struggle, medium. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah. I struggle with meditation sometimes because my mind is it can be very busy. And for me, I have a really hard time sitting still, especially if there's a lot going on. So for me, in some of my most challenging times, the idea of like sitting down in stillness and closing my eyes and breathing seems like absolute torture. When I actually am practicing regularly and doing the things that I need to do to support that practice, it does become a lot easier, as does anything with practice. But for me, the first step in talking to someone about meditation is understanding what breathing feels like for them. Because for some people, let's say if you're struggling a lot with anxiety and to caveat, if there was somebody that came to me that said like, I have anxiety disorder, I've got mental health specific diagnoses or things that I'm working with a professional on, I want to know that and ensure that they're getting that professional help, because sometimes telling someone to do something very introspective can trigger things that you don't want to trigger for them, which makes them even more resistant to what might be beneficial. So that's kind of my first piece. But understanding, how does it feel for them to breathe? Because for instance, if I'm giving someone a breath focused meditation, but it's sometimes breath retention and things like that can actually trigger anxiety and fear in people. And either you're putting them in a bad headspace or they're putting themselves in a headspace that's not healthy or supportive for them, if that's what happens. But also it can just, even if it's like, if you haven't been actively practicing breath, for me to say like, okay, you're going to do a deep breathing meditation, that feels very uncomfortable and is probably not going to put them in a state that they're looking for.
Right.
So it's first about getting to know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis already, if they have any routines, and what their relationship with meditation and mindfulness is. I usually start very slow. So I'm not having somebody sit for longer than like 3 minutes, and it's very focused on something. So it's like mantra-based, breath-based, guided meditation. Sometimes, just counting your breath, like you're not changing the breath, but you're just counting it. Things that are actively keeping the mind focused, especially when we're first starting out, because for me, as somebody with a busy mind, as a default, I need to have something while I'm getting into a practice that keeps me focused. Otherwise, my brain is just like everywhere. So that's a big piece of it for me. And I like habit stacking. So if you have things in the morning or evening or at lunch or whenever you're going to meditate, how can we connect that meditation practice with something you're already doing, so that it is a little bit easier to start to build that habit and that practice, because building the habit can sometimes be the hardest thing, right? Is like actually creating the space for yourself to do the thing that we need to do. And there's a lot of, science and research around why it's so hard for us to break bad habits, like, for lack of a better word, habits that don't support us. Let's go with that. Right. And why it's harder to do things that feel good for us. And our body is primed in a certain way when we've had a lot of stress and trauma in our life. We're primed to not want to do the thing that's going to actually help us. So sometimes when you're linking just a teeny tiny practice of 3 minutes of breathing or whatever it's going to be to after you brush your teeth in the morning, or, for me, a really great practice lately has been, we bought this new like coffee maker that's quite hands-on. Like it's not just a press it and go sort of situation. And it's become at first I was like, ugh, I just want my coffee in the morning. I don't want to do all the things. Yeah. But it's the habit of making coffee every morning. It's become a mindfulness practice for me first thing in the morning. And I actually really love it because I just have to sit there and watch it. And I'm very present-minded. Yeah. I'm very quiet, and I can focus in. So for me, stacking mindfulness moment with a practice that I'm already going to do, because I named the coffee, has been helpful to get me into a place of wanting to do that more. So for me, it's really about stacking those things on and then building from there. And again, it's always going to be, when working with me, tailored to what works for you. I never want to create any sense of disease through these practices. Or
forced activity kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And coming back to your coffee thing, that's funny because I was having a conversation with someone just the other day, and they were saying, one of the things they detest the most is having to start their vehicle when it's cold and have it warm up. And they said, but you know what I started doing is, they said they started meditating and focusing almost like Wim Hof kind of style, but like breathwork technique while they're sitting in their car as it's heating up. And what started as a necessity because they were cold and they didn't like being cold, so they wanted to change it, has now become almost this meditative thing. And that they almost kind of, like you're saying, look forward to it now. And when they get in the car, they start it, they do their breathing, but it's become meditative. And so, like you said, it's like kind of stacked on top and has become now this 3-minute sacred ritual practice that happens daily, that went from something horrible to something that's now this like set, like reset, intent-based thing.
Oh, right? I love that.
Yeah. And well, especially for you, because you live where it's minus 300.
It's been very warm this year, I'll have you know.
That's true. That's true. I heard that. But yeah, so I really like that idea. And I like that you're highlighting that, because I think more people can do that and break the ideas of what they think meditation is supposed to be. Like it's supposed to be an hour of nothing, right? Like my mind is not thinking anything, but instead we're talking about like start where you can start. Make it 3 minutes, make it 10 minutes, make it movable. So it's some days it's 3 minutes and other days it's 20 minutes.
Yeah. And on that point of movable, make it physically movable. For me, there's been periods in my life where, like I was saying, the idea of sitting down and sitting still seemed like torture, especially when I was really deep in emotion. And one of the only ways for me after my dad passed was to do some yoga and to move, or to like actually work out, or take the dogs for a walk, or those can all be meditative practices, or they can all be really great practices to do prior to sitting down into a meditation, because it's moving the stuff in your body. And then it's like, okay, now my body feels like I've moved some stuff. I can settle in a little bit better. And so that can also be a really great practice to integrate at any point. It doesn't have to be if you're struggling with it, but just, it's a busy day, or if that's a really great way for you to stack. If you're somebody that works out every morning and walks your dog or gets your cardio in or works out or whatever, and you want to include meditation in that, when you're finished working out, sit down and do a meditation and tune into the body. And maybe that starts with like tuning into how your body's feeling after the movement. That can be a really great way to kind of set yourself up for a spacious practice if you're feeling like can't sit still.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. It's great advice. And it's simple. And sometimes we listen to things like that and we're like, oh, well, that's like too easy, but really it can be that easy. And when we're trying to create new practices or new routines or new habits, they should come in a form that is a little bit easier, right? Because it's like when you crash diet or you crash creating habits, you can only sustain it for so long, right? So we want to create lifestyle versus crashing.
And with the understanding that like that in itself will ebb and flow. And it's this like fine balance of finding practices that are sustainable and nourishing for you, that you would do for the rest of your life if you could. And also knowing that like sometimes those practices might fall off, and it's not a failure or oh, well, it didn't work for me then. It's well, for whatever reason that happened, do they still, and that's where I talk about like coming back home to yourself. So, oh, I haven't been meditating at all in the last year. 2020 has been rough for me. I haven't meditated at all. Is meditation in the form that I'm doing it still something that's supportive for me right now? Well, maybe in 2020 it's not, because I'm sitting around all day in my house. So not having movement attached to my practice doesn't work right now, because it's just not that helpful. So that's where that coming home and being able to reconnect into your sense of self and what is going to be best for you in that moment, and then changing, because a practice that you're doing in your 20s, you know, to when you're 40 and have children and, or, you know, or you're a busy career person or whatever, like it just might not align. And I think sometimes we get a little too linear, and sometimes the self-help world can be like, well, no, do this, and this is what you do. And it's like, well, but you know, let's be open to other options and how we can make it our own. It doesn't have to be the same either.
Right. Yeah. I think that's great. So we kind of touched on meditation. Before we're done here, I also want to touch on yoga specifically and how you incorporate that into your coaching practice with people, and the value. And I'm talking about the value more than just the physical exercise for it, but the value of yoga with transmuting traumas, energies, stored things in the body. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, you know, I do just teach strictly yoga, either, you know, small group or one-on-one, or, you know, group classes, and then have the coaching on the side, or not on the side, but like in addition to as a separate offering. And oftentimes they intertwine, because we hear, you know, I'm so stressed. I can't get a moment. Especially right now, like I can't go to the gym. I'm limited in what I can do. My experience, and I know there's other folks as well that probably experience this even more than I have. But getting into yoga even as a, you know, able-bodied white woman, I still felt very uncomfortable because I didn't necessarily have the same body type as the yogis. I didn't see myself as flexible. I just didn't feel like I fit in. And so for marginalized folks, that can be even more at the forefront, additionally cost-wise, things like that. Like it's such a accessible practice, and it's so beneficial for people. And yet it can be very hard to enter into. It can feel intimidating. So for me, overall with yoga, my practices are a hatha based, but they're quite slow, not like a yin or a restorative style. That's, you know, where we're holding shapes for quite a bit longer and using a lot of props. I would say I'm in the middle of that, where I like to have a slower practice. I like working with folks that are newer to yoga, or like a more beginner style practice, because I think in my experience, there's such subtle, the word that's coming to mind is pleasure, but like there's such a beautiful aspect of a subtle, gentle, you know, slower practice. And for me, that is a way I can tune in a lot more to my body and what my body is talking to me about when I'm doing that, versus like quick. So everyone has their own style and practice, and you know, whatever works for you is great. But for me, that's the kind of style that I like to teach. And it's more beginner accessible, which is what I want, is to introduce people who maybe wouldn't be interested or would be uncomfortable going down that road. But for me, you know, yoga is so much more than a movement practice. That's what, you know, Western culture has moved it into, but it's a whole way of being. And so we can't, you know, get into all the intricate details of it. We'd be here for a while, but really I like to use it as a way to help people move through stress, move through, you know, what things are coming up in their body, and how we can support them. And I want to do more training. You know, I did a yoga for mental health training a few months ago, and that just blew my mind open to the way, it was always something I experienced, but it blew my mind open to the way that we hold everything in our bodies. We hold our stress, we hold our emotions, we hold, and that's, you know, good and bad emotions. And I don't believe there's actually bad emotions. There's just ones that are harder for us to move through, I think. But they're all purposeful and important. But I like to use yoga as a way for people to connect back into their bodies, to have gentle, subtle movement that can be accessible to everybody, but then also start to tap into the benefits of how, when we move our bodies, we are in a mindful, gentle, loving way, with the intention of all of those things, we are able to sift through things that are maybe we're just having a hard time holding. And it can be a really beautiful practice in addition to a lot of other supports in mental health. You know, there's support in talking and working with a coach, working with a psychologist or a therapist, you know, working with a physiotherapist and your doctor and all of those things. And then yoga can be this beautiful way to support all of the other things that are happening in the body. So for me, I like to incorporate that into coaching when I can and when somebody's open to it. But again, it's not something I'd ever push someone to if that's not what they were comfortable with. And I'm hoping in future I can start to get some more certifications around like specifically somatic experiencing and how we can utilize movement in the body to move emotion. And there's things stuck in us, we can kind of help to support ourselves in releasing it.
That's beautiful. And that's so well explained too. So thank you for that, because that gives people a lot of context to kind of start to wrap their minds around how these things all blend together, because for some people it's really foreign, right? And so I just also want to come back and touch quickly on the actual verbal coaching part that you do as well, because one of the things that I am so in awe of and also very inspired by is your ability in communication. And I've seen you do this in a lot of different situations, your ability to be very compassionate to all people involved in a situation, but at the same time, be able to go straight to specific questions, the truths behind what's occurring, and the reasons and the rationales behind why they're showing up. Like you have, this is a true innate ability that you have that I've seen you use in a lot of times. And I think that's one of the biggest values is why you are such a unique coach, is that you can hone in on those things right away. And so I'm kind of curious if you're able to explain to people how you do that, or is that truly just an intuitive ability that you have?
I would say little column A, little column B. And thank you for that. That's a very kind compliment. So I would say, you know, if you're working with somebody or, you know, as a coach myself, I went through a certification process. But I did that and went down the road of coaching because I was like, I feel like I'm doing this a lot already. I was doing this in my, you know, previous career in like a business setting. And then I was also doing this just in my life with the people around me. And so I was like, okay, well, you know, let's certify and then we'll move into that as a more professional thing. For me, I like to explain that coaching is about forward movement. So it's about looking at where I'm at, and for me as a wellness coach, we're looking at all these different aspects of life, feeling out and finding where the stuckness is happening, where that disconnect from self is happening, and then moving towards what it is that you want. And sometimes there's also a discovery process because we don't always know what we don't know. We don't always know what we want. So that can be part of it. What that looks like is us having a conversation and asking a lot of questions. And that's really kind of the fundamental baseline of coaching is asking powerful questions, really honing into what people are saying and noticing the subtleties of answers. So sometimes it's that idea of like, if you ask me like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm fine. And you're like, but are you? So it's that we have an answer. And then sometimes what we need is somebody to reflect back to us and ask the question of, but are you? Because you hesitated there. So what's going on underneath that? And really asking open-ended questions. And I think of it as like my questions are holding up a mirror to you and you're reflecting back what it is that's actually underneath the surface. Because usually the symptom or the thing that isn't working is not actually the issue. It's something beneath the surface that we need to bring up for you to realize like, oh, I'm actually just holding myself back here because I'm afraid, or I don't trust that I can do the thing that I want to do, or I don't feel like I'm going to succeed, or whatever it is. So it's really kind of in that process, digging into those things, and then that also can flow into more of like an advisory or coaching or consulting role rather, where then I'm saying, okay, are you open to hearing about some mindfulness practices that might support you, or, you know, those sorts of things. So it's really about asking powerful questions, getting someone to reflect. And that's one of the beautiful things about working with people one-on-one, is that rarely do we hold an hour for ourselves in a week to do deep reflection and have somebody reflect those things back to us. So I feel like that's where there can be a lot of really great self-realizations. And the other thing I just want to note is the difference between counseling and coaching, because that comes up a lot. Like, well, when do I work with a counselor? When do I work with a coach? So a coach isn't going to directly support in specific mental health challenges, because we're not psychiatrists, we're not psychologists. So we're not trained in like mental health diagnosis or those sorts of things. What I see the differences of coaching versus counseling is that counseling is oftentimes about going back. So we're looking at like, oh, there was a past trauma in my childhood, and I'm going to talk to you and bring up those feelings and move through counseling psychology practices to help process that emotion. Whereas coaching I see as moving forwards towards a goal. So it's like the backward trajectory that sometimes we need both, because we need to heal the stuff in order to get to a place where we are feeling grounded and able to move forward. And then we work on with a coach, reconnecting to self and moving towards the things that we want. So there's intertwinement and crossover, but they are different practices and different people that you would work with for those things.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, you completely covered everything. This is just so great. You offered so much information and I love it. So clearly explained. And again, I know that a lot of people will gain a lot of insight from this. And so I do again want to highlight that you are one of the personal journey guides that we offer on avalonspirit.com. So you guys can check Elyse out there again under personal journey guides. As well, you can check out Elyse's personal website of CathreaCoachingandWellness.com. Correct? I got that right?
Yes.
CathreaCoachingandWellness.com. I will put that in the links underneath the post of this, so you guys can also check out all of her services and offerings on her website. It is so worth your time because you will gain a lot. And I can say that not just because of what I hear from you and what I've seen, but also what I've personally experienced in my life. You've added so much value, both, through your friendship, but professionally as well. I really have gained a lot. So yeah.
Same.
Well, I love it. Okay. Well, Elyse, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing all your insights. And I know for a fact we will do this again. So there will be more to come.
We'll just talk about other things.
Yeah, we will.
All the good wooey things.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you again so much. And we'll chat soon.
Sounds good.